Hey, we've got Frank in Dallas, Texas. You're on with Matt and Don.
Hello,
Oh, can't hear you.
you guys. You had to cut me off short because of audio difficulties. So I'm truly hoping this is...
I can't understand what you're saying.
Okay. Is it still bad audio? Or
Oh, that's better.
Better now. Thank you.
Keep talking,
Okay.
and I guess Vern will try and fix
Trying to
it.
get your question out.
Yeah, I called 3 weeks ago, spoke with you, but you guys had to cut me off again because of bad audio difficulties. You had also said that we were kind of in consensus because I had maintained that critical thinking was the best way to approach most of these discussions. I had kind of misstated that it was an all-powerful force, and you had corrected me on that. What I should have said was that it's a all-encompassing weapon with which to approach all human problems. Back in December,
I don't know, that's a big claim.
Yeah,
I think it's a powerful weapon.
I think there may be exceptions to that. I'm a huge proponent of critical thinking and teaching critical thinking in schools, and not as an elective, because getting people to understand sound reasoning and evidence so that they're better reaching conclusions is a good thing. But
absolutely,
I can sit around and think critically about all kinds of stuff. And sometimes there are scenarios where I may not be able to get to any sort of answer, and yet I need to. So if I meet someone new and they're like, hey, do you want to go out and have dinner? I could sit around and analyze that and weigh the pros and cons and investigate this, but ultimately it comes down to, do I actually want to go down to dinner? So I'd rather just answer that question and say, hell yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree that critical thinking takes way more time and effort than ordinary, daily thinking. And we don't have to think critically 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Probably 85, 95% of the time, we can just do what we've always done, and we don't have to resort to critical thinking.
This is what
but I hear your frustration.
This is what Sagan.
Your frustration.
This is what Sagan was talking about by training your baloney detection kit. You use critical thinking such that your visceral inferences are more likely to be correct, not that they're necessarily going to be correct.
Exactly. And you also bring up a good point that you say critical thinking will not necessarily lead you to a truth. My point is that it at least keeps you from indulging in the logical fallacies and the cognitive biases, which are obviously frustrating you with these other callers.
Yeah, when properly applied, and we're fallible humans. We make mistakes, and
proper investigation and critical thinking. If you're walking across a football field that's been laced with mines, there's no guarantee that your exercise of critical thinking is going to help you find the path across that field. But proper investigation and critical thinking will increase your chances of avoiding the mines.
Exactly. And that's like you're saying, you advocate teaching critical thinking in schools. If everybody was at least familiar with a list of logical fallacies and cognitive biases, they could not only recognize it in the other person's arguments, but also recognize it in their own.
Yep.
And when they realize that they are indulging in these poor reasoning processes, sometimes they can correct themselves even before you or somebody else who's discussing things can correct them.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the perfect thing. So like the last caller, if he had a good understanding of logical fallacies, then even if he committed one, I would be able to point it out and say, here's the fallacy and here's why, and you would get immediately assent to,
You'd
crap.
have a much better conversation.
That's happened to me live on stage in the middle of a debate where I thought I had solved the Izot problem, and John Ferrer correctly challenged me that I was actually smuggling an ought in and showed the fallacious reasoning. And I was like, oh yeah, because it's not that you're always going to see it. It's that when somebody shines a light on it, you should be able to see it. And what happens frequently on the show is I shine 5 lights on something, and then somebody goes, nope, that's not it. No, because every of these, it happened on Talk Heathen today, where I pointed out that somebody was shifting the burden of proof, and he literally said, or I'm not going to say literally, let me back that. This is as close to paraphrasing as I can get. I'm not shifting the burden of proof. I'm just expecting you to prove me wrong before I'll change my mind.
Yeah, exactly. And like with Brian, the last caller who was talking about the heart has to have a purpose and therefore a designer, you correctly pointed out, okay, this is the Black Swan fallacy. Now, Brian already had known about the Black Swan fallacy, and you pointed it out to him. If he was intellectually honest, he would say, oh, crap, yeah, you got me. I was wrong there.
And sometimes that happens.
Pretty obvious. Exactly, and you're lucky when it does.
Yeah.
Now, back in December, Matt had given both a talk and I think a magic show in Dallas-Fort Worth at the Metroplex Atheist for the winter solstice party.
Yep.
Afterwards, you were relaxing at the Radisson Hotel lobby. I walked up to you and I handed you a copy of my book, The Final Pattern, The Critical Need for Critical Thinking.
Yep.
I don't know if you've had a chance to read that.
I have not, but it is still sitting on the nightstand next to my bed in the, do this next category.
Now, you're probably familiar with Peter Boghossian.
Yes.
He's a philosophy professor at Portland State University. I went to see a talk of his. One of the very first slides that he had in his presentation was just the word facts, F-A-C-T-S, with a huge X through it. And he asked everybody in the audience to please not take a picture of that with him on stage. He didn't want them saying, oh, Peter thinks the facts aren't important. But he went on to say, no, this means don't waste your time with facts.
Yeah, I fundamentally disagree with him.
Well, I mean, when he wrote the book, A Manual for Creating Atheists.
Which isn't what that book is.
Exactly. It's a manual for creating critical thinkers.
Maybe.
But his approach is not to attack what facts they believe in or even their beliefs themselves. Like you guys asked, say, tell us what you believe and why.
Yes.
He focuses on the why, the epistemology.
Yes, that's my focus as well. The why is the important part.
Exactly. And again, that's why I wrote my book, because it centers on the biases that everybody has, you, me, and everybody else. We all want to think that how we were raised and the facts that we have come across must be the truth. And so when you're frustrated with these other callers saying, hey, this is my bias, you have to point out their biases. You have to spin your wheels over and over again. An incredibly frustrating process because the caller will not acknowledge their own biases to begin with.
Yeah, but we don't get to choose our callers, right? They choose us.
So some callers do have the temerity to point out and acknowledge when we've exposed a particular bias or a flaw, and some don't. But the one concern here is I don't do this show for the person that I'm on the phone with. I do it for the thousands of other people who share their views, who are sitting back watching in relative safety, watching that other person get exposed as being unreasonable, because that's an incredibly uncomfortable position for the rest of them to be in. I'm almost never trying to change the person's mind that I'm on the phone with. I'm trying to do the best job I can to potentially change their mind. So the people who are not in the spotlight, because we know that if someone has publicly professed a belief, they are now less likely to change it under any circumstances. And in some cases, pointing out that they are factually wrong will cause them to just double down. And so while it's nice when a caller is willing to engage honestly and acknowledge errors, et cetera, that's not sorry, callers, you are a tool for me to reach everybody else who shares your views. You don't have by the way, that is a function, not your purpose.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, they become defensive and you spend all your time trying to get around that defensiveness. And that's why I think you and I are on kind of the same page when we say teaching critical thinking and recognizing these fallacies and biases is step one. You can't really have a very constructive discussion or at least hope to change. You're never going to call, or like you said, you're never going to convince the caller.
This is really subtle. But there's one tiny thing that I disagree with that on, and that is it takes multiple approaches. For the people who are willing to acknowledge their biases when you point them out, cool, do that. For the people who are there are people who are unwilling to acknowledge their biases, who may be willing to say, oh, yeah, that is in fact a logical fallacy. Let me rework the argument. They may never get to the point where they recognize the biases that are leading them in the wrong direction, but if they are at least honest and open in addressing things in a logical, reasonable fashion, they may get there. So, there's this old statement for lawyers, which is when the facts are on your side, argue the facts. When the law is on your side, argue the law. And when neither the facts and law are on your side, pound the table as hard as you can. My thing is, when the facts seem to be the sort of thing that might compel someone, present the facts. When exposing their bias might be the thing that is going to compel someone, expose that bias. When pointing out logical fallacies might be the thing that changes somebody's mind, do that. I want as many different approaches as we need to reach as many people as possible.
Totally agree. And like you say, everybody comes at it from a different angle. My only contention is that I feel when I hear your frustration, and I'm frustrated listening to your discussions with a lot of believers as well, I say, well, again, if all you're going to do is be hammering against their biases and the way that they're already coming in their defensiveness, it can be very entertaining, but ultimately it's frustrating. But I agree that it's the listeners that are listening that don't have to be defensive themselves, which make something out of it.
Yep.
So I totally agree with that. My contention is just that if everybody were to learn logical fallacies, cognitive biases, the same way that they learn not to employ a double negative in speech or to contend that 2 + 2 = 5, then it would be so obvious in all rhetoric, all discussions, and all debates.
Yeah, it would be the end of the show.
Head shows.
There would
exactly, which is what you want.
Yeah,
which is what you want.
So
you
and Frank,
want everyone.
I don't want to be rude about this, but you and I are in agreement, either 90+% or whatever. I'm going to switch back to some other calls where I might be in much more disagreement.
That's fine. Please read the book. Thank you.
I will. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.